Hello chess friends and welcome to your Out of Chess channel and welcome to a beautiful game from the Tata Steel Rapid and Blitz Chess Tournament in 2024 that we have followed now last week. We have here an amazing game between Magnus Carlsen against Wesley So in a tricky Kholmov Gambit of the Russian game of the Petrov's Defense. And we have to mention Magnus won the event with a beautiful result, especially in rapid chess. He was unstoppable, and also Magnus, we know, won the Blitz section, but we really have to say Wesley So was also incredible. He was on the second place in the rapid section, but also he was on the second place in the Blitz section. It was really beautiful for me to see Wesley So performing again in a great way. Magnus was of course too strong for the competition, but Wesley So is now the second force from the Tata Steel Rapid and Blitz Chess Tournament in 2024. So I've sorted out now this beautiful game, Magnus Carlsen against Wesley So. This is rapid chess, 25 minutes on the clock plus 10 seconds increment per move. Really tricky line, this Kholmov Gambit of the Russian game. With the white pieces, Magnus opened with the move e4, e5 by Wesley. We have knight to f3, knight to f6, the Petrov's Defense. The Russian game is on the board. Magnus takes, and now Wesley goes into the tricky Damiano Variation with knight to e4. It's not a mistake, but it's a sharper line. Usually you should go with the standard d6, but I think with this move knight to e4, maybe Wesley So wanted to deviate a little bit from the standard ideas. Maybe he wanted to trick here Magnus Carlsen into unknown territory. After knight takes e4, Magnus plays of course queen to e2, and you cannot get the knight back to f6 because you run into this dirty trap with knight to c6 and discover check, and the queen is lost. So that's why Wesley had to play queen to e7. Magnus picks up now the knight, still protects also the knight on e5, but now Wesley will eventually get the knight back with the move d6. Magnus has to now play the move d4, and after d takes e5, we have reached now the standard position of the Kholmov Gambit, where Black is giving up a pawn, but I think the game becomes similar, not the same, but similar to the England Gambit. If you're familiar maybe with the England Gambit, when White is playing the move d4, White has so far a pawn, an extra pawn, but there are tricky ideas afterwards, maybe with some dangerous checks when the queen gets deflected from this, or maybe we can attack further the position and maybe get the pawn back. Magnus, I think, plays here the best line. After here knight to c6 that Wesley So plays, Magnus plays the correct knight to c3, relies simply on faster development, because after queen to e5, queen takes e5, knight takes e5, Magnus has now an extra tempo after move bishop to f4. Wesley fixes now the knight on e5, Magnus plays now queenside castling. So this is really, I think, perfect thematic chess by Magnus Carlsen, where he's showing how you play against this, I would say, drawish lines, because Wesley is probably satisfied now. Okay, the queens are off the board, the material is equal. Okay, White has a better activity, but Black's activity is also perfectly fine because the bishop will eventually come into the game. So, as I said, here Wesley is saying, I'll try to get the draw and not further complicate things. Here, Wesley continued with bishop to d7, normal development, and now Magnus goes with knight to b5. Maybe here the best choice is to play bishop to b5, and then after bishop to b5 you can go with c6. Then White would continue the game with the bishop pair, which wouldn't be maybe such a huge problem, because as we mentioned, the queens are off the board and the game is not so tricky, it's not so tactical all over the board. But after knight to b5, Wesley plays a theoretical novelty, queenside castling. Maybe this is something that he has prepared at home in this Kholmov Gambit. Magnus picks up now the pawn, says okay, show me what you got. King to b8, and now knight to b5. We have now bishop to c5, and you see now with this Gambit line, I would say again here by Wesley So, now suddenly Wesley relies on a better piece activity. Look at this, 3 pieces of this are already out. He has a good activity with the rooks, and also the king is now on a perfect score. So here Wesley is taking over when it comes to activity, but meanwhile he lost a very important pawn. Magnus fixes now the position, here plays f3, gets out of the attack. We have now the move g5, and now bishop to e5. F takes e5, and now another good move, I would say, here by Magnus, knight to c3, with ideas to fix the position. around the square e4 because this is an isolated pawn, and then you want to play the blockade in front of this pawn. But also what could happen if you leave maybe your knight here on b5 in some lines, maybe not immediately, but black could maybe trade off the bishop for a knight, then you pick it up here with the bishop, and then the game would lead into this opposite colored bishops where the game could be too drawish. So that's why Magnus gets out of the attack and keeps now still his knight on the board. g4 by Wesley. That's how you play with the bishop pair. You're trying to open spaces, open diagonals, open files, create of course an open battle. F takes g, and now bishop to e3. First of all, the check. Wesley attacks now the position in a different way here. He's trying to leave this bishop on f1, not allowed to get developed, but now Magnus releases the pressure on the d file and plays now a beautiful bishop to d3. Again, a thematic move here by Magnus Carlsen. He's saying here, okay, you will get your pawn back on g2, but at least I'm activating further my pieces. And that's again a beautiful, beautiful motif here by Magnus. He's relying again on his piece activity. He had to really bring his pieces into the game because the pieces on h1 and g1, the bishop and the rook, were simply stuck on the starting square. So on f1, pardon me, were simply stuck on the starting square, and that's why he has now development, and he is still up in material. He still has an extra pawn here on the king side. We have now bishop to f4 by Wesley. Magnus advances the pawn, h6 here by Wesley, and now after move rook to g1, now comes the critical moment of the game here. Wesley makes a huge blunder with the move bishop to f3. Seems tempting. You are attacking now the pawn on g4, but Magnus simply pushed the pawn further and had now a great passer supported by the rook. A better choice was to play bishop to c6. Then after something like g5, if that would have been the case here, unfortunately for Wesley, he didn't play bishop to c6. Then after h takes g5 and h takes g5, you have now this idea: bishop to e3. You attack the rook, and when the rook is coming here on g4, in order to stay connected to this pawn, then you further trade off pieces, and then in this tactical sequence, Wesley So could of course have the pawn back, and this would be, I think, a pretty equalish game. Maybe here white can pick up now the pawn on d4, but I think with two bishops on the board, and now look at this. This is a 3 versus 2 situation on the queen side. Okay, probably white will create a pass pawn, but in the worst scenario, I think black will even sacrifice the bishop for one pawn, and then 2 minor pieces against the bishop again couldn't win the game. So in the worst case scenario, I think Wesley has a draw in this particular sequence. So that's why for here rook to g1 and Wesley's bishop to f3, Magnus has now the immediate opportunity to play g5, h takes g5, h takes g5, and now the whole idea with bishop to e3 that worked previously is suddenly not working because of the rook to g3. The problem about the move bishop to f3 is that you're getting lined up on the third rank, like here already these bishops are on the same rank, and now you can just prolong the game by maybe playing bishop to e4. Now we pick it up, takes, and now in this sequence here, white is much better. Now with 2 extra pawns, with still this pass pawn on the g file, the game is suddenly collapsing here for black. So after h takes g5, that's why e4 tried here by Wesley So. Magnus took, Wesley took, and now Magnus also takes here the piece, and still has this very dangerous passer on the g file, and he has here a 3 versus 2 situation on the queen side. Again, a completely I would say here winning endgame here from Magnus, but Wesley is battling bishop to e3. We have now rook to f1, rook to e8, attacking now the piece, and now g6. This is a great move here by Magnus Carlsen in faster time formats, finding this beautiful tactic, because rook to e4 is not a possibility. Now you push the pawn further, black has to go behind, and now you deliver a check, promote the queen. Black is pretty much forced to give up now the rook for the queen, and in this endgame obviously white is completely winning. So that's why after g6, Wesley had to now block the g7 square. Magnus continues with a beautiful plan with knight to c5, wants to get the knight on a more active square. But even if king to c8 happens, to get maybe the king closer, you have a beautiful move knight to d3, and then after something like king to d7, the good part is that finally white's rook could play freely because the knight is controlling the back rank. The only way maybe that Magnus can lose this game if he's careless, and then he leaves somehow maybe with the rook the first rank, and there's no control of the e1 square. So that's why knight to c5, not only attacking its opponent here, the opponent's queen side, but also preparing maybe a potential knight to d3 if it's necessary to cover the e1 square. Here Wesley continued with rook to g8. Magnus of course gets the rook behind the pawn. We have now king to c8, rook to g4. Now comes this attack, and now Magnus goes slowly but surely closer to the action and is threatening now a very dangerous knight to f6. Bishop to g7 here by Wesley, controlling the square of course. c3 by Magnus, finally also creating some breathing spaces for the king, but also trying to include maybe the king into the attack. King to d7, knight to g3, preparing knight to f5, and whatever you do, it's not possible, I think, anymore to defend this position. Even if you play something like, I don't know, king to e6 immediately, then the issue is we will simply play knight to h5. You're trying maybe here king to f5, we go here c6, and now we can even trade off the minor pieces. The issue is here for black that Magnus Carlsen has here the rook behind the pawn, and in any scenario, even if you grab this pawn, this is still a 3 versus 2 situation on the queen side, and still it's of course a completely winning endgame here for white. So that's why after knight to g3, here Wesley tried to battle in a different way. Magnus attacks, bishop to f6, and now here after a g7, great move again here by Magnus Carlsen. Rook to g8 had to be played here by Wesley, and now after rook to e4, in this particular position, Wesley So resigned. The issue is, of course, that you can never really take here this pawn on g7, because you run into tactics like rook to e7. Even if you try, I don't know, maybe to get the rook here, then Magnus Carlsen would probably push the pawns here, would simply in one moment start to go with the king here, maybe also get it to the g6 square, and then obviously it's game over. Again, I'm repeating, even if you pick up the pawn here, you run into this tactics where you probably lose then the bishop on g7. So great game by Magnus Carlsen. Here he played again with 100% accuracy without any inaccuracies, mistakes or blunders in rapid chess. Really great performance. I think this was a beautiful thematic game because Magnus shows how to play, I think, this sometimes tough to play positions, I would say, very complicated, where you rely simply maybe on a tiny little activity. You see Magnus played very pragmatic, very thematic chess. Great win again. The second best player in this tournament against Wesley So. So okay, congratulations to Magnus Carlsen for winning this beautiful rapid and blitz section of the Tata Steel event. He was really dominant in all of the time formats, and also congratulations, of course, to Wesley So for winning the second place in also both of these sections. So okay, if you want to see some other beautiful chess games that we have covered already from this event, check out our coverage. Here are some links on some games that we have analyzed before, and if you like this content, hit the subscribe button. See you soon with some more videos, and what do we say in the end? Chess is the best, of course.